Howdy, folks. It's your host, Lee Larson, and you're back with another episode of Follow the Leader. Y'all, I am here with Makenna Sellers of Montana Renewable Energy Association. Welcome, Makenna.
Thanks, Lee. Happy to be here.
Glad to hear from you. Tell us, you are the executive director of Montana Renewable Energy Association, or as we'll refer to it for the rest of this episode as MREA. Um, How did you find this position? What is your connection to Montana and renewable energy? Tell us about yourself.
Totally. Yeah. So I've been the executive director for the Montana Renewable Energy Association since 2022, just going on just over 3 years. Grew up as a Billings kid, so went to school at West High and I speak very highly of all of the teachers, educators, and mentors that I had in those really formative grade school and high school years where you don't really know what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So I loved being outside. The connection to nature was always very important to me, going and like backpacking in the Beartooths with my friends. Taking an environmental science class in high school was a big shift point for me, and just understanding that my personal actions have a direct impact on the environment around me, and there's not as much space as we culturally tend to believe that there is this invisible wall between the human world and the natural world that we've been creating over time. And the fact that that really doesn't exist and that it's quite permeable. So getting to understand that led me to pursue a career in environment and clean energy. So went to school, studied some environmental studies and sustainable business. Really liked having that combination of business entrepreneurship paired with something that has social activism and social good behind it. So after that, came back, knew I wanted to put down roots and give back to the home state of Montana. And I've been working in clean energy and conservation policy ever since in various places. So that's a little bit about where I come from. I'm a Gonzaga grad, so watching a lot of basketball these days. Go Zags. And work a lot at the state capitol. So that's some of my background.
And for folks who are not familiar with this region, I know I have quite a few Montana followers, but Gonzaga's in Spokane, Washington, which not a far drive at all from the big city of Missoula, big city. So you do see folks from Montana go to schools in Washington and the West Coast often. So, which I wouldn't consider Spokane West Coast, though. It's still inward. It's still pretty
Yeah,
in.
they call themselves the inland Northwest, and even people in Montana tend to debate that. They're like, Spokane isn't the Northwest, but that's what
Right.
they call themselves. You know, they have that cool magazine called The Inlander, so that's what they call themselves. So I'll stick to that.
Well, and something that you mentioned that I think is perfect for your role as executive director of MREA, and we'll talk about that role specifically in a second. But this understanding of business and their natural world, right? This permeable, as you said, it's permeable. MREA works with businesses and industries all the time. Does MREA take a stance or refuse to work with any industries or businesses, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, the MREA history is a cool one. We've been around for 25 years. Our mission is fostering the growth of renewables in Montana. So I'd say that in a world where there's lots of anti and against certain measures or positions, we sit in this very proactive, pro renewables, pro clean energy, and just pro cleaner air and a better energy system. So I like that we sit in this more positive space for business opportunity, for growing the workforce. So that's generally where we sit. Our members are really diverse. We range from the student that's going to school for mechanical engineering that might want to pursue a career in wind development, or the homeowner that might have installed solar and batteries on their roof and just want to keep tabs on what's going on at the Capitol or what's going on with their local government with planning or building code laws, you name it. So I really like that diversity that MREA brings to the table. We represent solar installation companies, energy efficiency professionals. We cover a lot of, I call them like engineering firms and planning firms, some utilities, rural electric cooperatives, and individuals that are a part of that mix too.
Well, and then you cover there is so much going on in Montana with our energy. Can we talk about we saw in the headlines just this week about Northwestern Energy and Colstrip. What's going on there?
Yeah, there's big news going on in the energy space, and of course I'm biased because I think everything energy related is big news. But it's wild how much we take for granted. You know, you flip on the lights. We've had a really bizarre winter in Montana. If you're living here, that if you're living in towns above or below a certain elevation, you've had 50 and 60-degree days in the middle of January. That's not that normal. 2 years ago, we had um, below 20 and 30 below degrees Fahrenheit. And so these extreme weather events make it really hard to predict how we need to plan for keeping the lights on and also keeping homes warm and the hospitals running and buildings functioning. So all of that is really incredible that we have both the infrastructure and the reliability and resiliency to keep all that going. That is no small feat. The fact that we could do that is really incredible to me. So how we plan for our energy system is incredibly important, and it's not something that you can just plan for minutes in advance or weeks in advance. We have to be planning years and years and even decades in advance. So enter these, what in this world of, at least in Montana, and it's true of most of the United States, regulated utilities have to come up with something called integrated resource plans or 20-year plans. And so those are forward-looking documents that they're required to file with government agencies that say, as the monopoly utility, here's what we expect to do in order to meet customer demand and provide affordable and reliable gas and electricity in the coming years. So Northwestern, which is Montana's largest investor-owned utility right now, they just filed their 20-year plan today. It was just made public. And so we can talk a little bit about that if you've got some local listeners. There's Great Falls is the very first of the series of listening sessions that are going on with Northwestern. That first one's coming up on January 27th at the Great Falls Library. They'll be 2 hours long. They're in the evening, 5:30 to 7:30. I would say if anyone who pays an electricity bill, or if you care about the future of our energy system, if you care about clean air and clean water, show up to those and just hear what they have to say, and also just be engaged. Energy touches everyone's lives. We all plug in our iPhones or, ChatGPT and the data center world. You know, that's sort of the AI boom is becoming a whole separate topic. I know that Lee, you talked to another expert in that field earlier, but I think it goes without saying that energy touches all of our lives. I totally jumped you on the question you asked. You asked about the news around Colstrip. So that is an energy resource. It's been around since the 70s. It's a coal generating unit that's in eastern Montana. The town was actually named after the generating unit. So there's a town called Colstrip, Montana. For the longest time, Northwestern Energy has owned one portion of the generation of that plant. They've owned 222 megawatts for forever. Then there's also a lot of West Coast utilities that had shares of that plant as well. A lot of these West Coast utilities are now starting to step away from their ownership assets of Colstrip. So we've come to this, like January 1 was the first time that now Northwestern has taken on a lot of those West Coast shares and now has more electricity than the customers of Montana need coming from that Colstrip plant. So there's lots of questions as to how that's going to affect future utility planning. Who's going to pay for the not only that generation, but then the decommissioning when that plant eventually retires, and just how we manage the fact that we have um, more fossil generation coming onto our system, plus also like where that's going to be used and if and when we're going to need it. So really interesting stuff going on in the generation mix for Montana's energy system right now.
And thank you for explaining so much to that, 'cause, um, there like you said, we just had the AI data center talk, and it's concerning. Like, how is that going to affect not only the energy available, to Montanans, but their electric prices, their utility prices? Can we speaking of Northwestern Energy being in the news, they also have merged with a company out of South Dakota, I wanna say, but out of the Dakotas called Black Hills Core. Um, MREA is an intervener in this case. So, what is this merger and how is MREA playing a role, and how will that affect Montana citizens?
Big questions. Yeah, huge things that all these question marks still remain, and that's a large part why MREA and other interveners are getting involved in the case. So Northwestern has decided to join forces with Black Hills Corp. They do have some presence in South Dakota. It's actually more of, I think it's 7 states that Black Hills has some sort of presence. They have a lot of gas pipeline infrastructure. They've presented our Public Service Commission along with a number of other public service commissions. For those that may not be familiar with that, that's an government agency that oversees regulated monopolies, mostly electric utilities, some in like garbage disposal, telecommunications. But in Montana, the directive for our Public Service Commission is to balance the interests of captive customers and a monopoly utility that needs to be healthy and stable because they're the only game in town. Like, we need them to stay alive and thrive, and be stable, but we also need to make sure that captive customers aren't being bilked for a ton of money and they have no choice. Like, they don't have any competitors to go to. So that balancing act is a real challenge. And so in that balancing act, there's lots of documentation, oversight, lots of economists and legal staff that get involved in these processes for major decisions that happen with utilities. So one of those major decisions is this big company merger that got announced this summer. So the questions that come to mind for MREA, of course, our interest is renewables, a clean energy transition, and what's going to happen for distributed generation. Black Hills is a bigger company. They have community solar programs in Colorado that we've seen. They had a renewable ready program in, I believe, South Dakota and Wyoming, where large and industrial customers were able to buy shares of a large wind development project and use those credits for their electricity bills. So, like a renewable, almost like a REC program. So, there's some interesting models that we are curious to hear how Northwestern and Black Hills might carry those forward into Montana. So those are the types of questions that we're asking in this docket. Um, right now, we're in what's called the discovery phase. So all the interveners, which include labor unions that are asking about job certainty, it includes groups like us and the Northwest Energy Coalition and Renewable Northwest. We've all intervened jointly. It includes some cities that have made some commitments with the utility on something called a renewable rate option. So, a project that they've been working on that's not quite finalized. They're like, well, what happens when these companies merge? What's going to happen to our program? And so a lot going on, but we're in this discovery phase where we're asking questions back and forth, and we expect that this whole merger docket will be wrapped up by springtime around May. So something to look out for, because impacts to customer electricity bills is certainly a question that's still lingering.
Absolutely. You heard it, folks. Spring, May. That's like very soon, by the way. And it also feels like spring, and it shouldn't because we need more snow. And you're absolutely right. Um, It's been a very dry winter, and we need to think about that in terms of energy. How how is the current I mean, what are our current leaders doing? What energy task force are coming together? Who's on them? What conversations and things are happening with our elected officials?
In Montana, there's a few things going on with the governor's office as well as with our state legislators. So, right now, there's a group that's thinking about Public Service Commission modernization. That's been a topic that's covered pretty heavily. The governor's office has also launched something called the Governor's Energy Task Force. The big topics that are coming up is like energy reliability, transmission connectivity, and just planning for this next generation of energy infrastructure with the expectation that we're going to have increased electricity demand from potentially incoming data centers. This we see this more in the West Coast states like Oregon and Washington. It's not spoken about as much here, but I totally believe it to be a reality is the electrification of our lives. Switching to heat pumps, more people driving electric vehicles, that switch to more electricity demand and perhaps going a little further away from gas is going to leave us with a question of how to account for that infrastructure, and also how to capitalize on Montana's abundant clean energy resources. We rank as the most preeminent wind resource in the entire Pacific Northwest. Like, we rank number one, and we've got some development happening. But the bottleneck that we experience is we don't have the transmission to move the generation from a massive wind farm, or it doesn't even have to be massive, from that wind resource to the place that it's needed. So transmission is a really big topic. I'm expecting that we'll see something along the lines of an energy policy proposal next session. So some kind of entity that can help plan for where transmission lines could be built or opportunity zones so that we can plan ahead for, accounting for that pretty steep increase in electricity demand. What I'm not seeing so much, and something that we encourage, is capitalizing on distributed generation, batteries, and storage. So that's the homeowner that might install solar and batteries on their home, or the small business owner, and using that as an asset to the grid for peak shaving, for using that as virtual power plants, because when you accumulate that comes up to megawatts. You could avoid building an entire power plant just by having that private investment in our own small scale generation. When you multiply that by thousands and thousands of people, that makes a huge difference. And we know that those are clean electrons. So I would be excited to see more of that coming into the conversation alongside energy efficiency. Right now, it seems like between policymakers and the governor's office, it's all about, we know more electricity demand is coming, and there's less conversation about how to conserve.
Right. And these are great points. Absolutely. And that's something we don't you said electrification of our lives, and as soon as you said it, I was like, "Yep, that's a thing." Everything is electric and can be charged now, and that has demands too, not only on like energy, but how we're going to source those minerals in order to make all of it happen. There's a lot of different conversations to be had. When you talk about the clean energy of Montana, um, can you speak to Berkshire Hathaway's Glacier Solar Park? Say that a few times fast. But talk about some of the upcoming clean energy projects.
Yeah, there's definitely some cool development in the pipeline right now on the utility scale side. So close to you, Lee, in Great Falls. So up north, Etheridge, Glacier, and Toole counties, Berkshire Hathaway Energy is developing both a solar development, Glacier Solar, as well as a battery system. So I'm seeing this trend toward wind battery and solar in batteries. Even batteries were brought up in Northwestern's 20-year plan, both short-term and long-duration batteries. Um, so that's coming to be like increasing relevance because it deals with the variability and intermittency problem that is often brought up as a downside to renewables, like wind and solar. We're also seeing this world of geothermal popping up. And while there aren't any planned projects in Montana yet, the Fervo project in Utah is very interesting to track. I was just learning about a closed loop geothermal system that's happening over in Germany. And so that's just capturing the heat of the earth in more of a base load. You could describe it as base load, but doesn't have the same intermittency as the sun when it rises and sets or the wind when it blows. But it does have the curve that might be similar to something like gas or coal if you were to run it consistently. And we see that oftentimes gas is run intermittently. Even the coal strip generating station is run pretty intermittently. But if we're looking for base load, geothermal might be a really interesting one to follow if we can get it to be cost competitive. So that's being talked about a lot in Montana. But in the pipeline, yeah, the Berkshire Hathaway project is really interesting. I think it's expected to be coming together by the end of 2026. And that Glacier Battery project, and they're not small. The solar park is going to be 120 megawatts, the accompanying battery, 75 megawatt 2-hour battery, and it's going to be connected up with the Montana-Alberta tie line. So that's that transmission line that runs in between Montana and Alberta. Yeah, international.
That's really cool, and, not unsurprising, I mean, considering how similar the landscape is between Canada, if you just keep driving, it's funny. But, I, how that's really wonderful to see the industry and investment and us use that. How are we seeing in our workforce? What does that look like? Are folks what does it look like, to get training in any of these different industries? Can you talk a little bit about that, about someone who might wanna work in clean energy?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I'd like to see a little more of that in Montana. It's one of our priorities that if you grow up here, I would love to see an individual pursue a career in Montana without having to move to a Seattle or a Portland, that you can do it here. The the world of renewables is so diverse that direct workforce training could look a lot of different ways. The Montana DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality Energy Office, has a workforce training program right now on a smaller scale. It's actually more related to the home energy audit and HVAC and heat pump installation world. So they're training with plumbers, HVAC professionals, working with some electricians. So that's a program that we can point to. A few of the community colleges, I want to say that Miles City had been looking at doing a wind and solar installation professional training module, and so that's still getting in the works. But there's just so many opportunities depending on where you go. If you want to be going into the engineering side, if you want to be strictly a solar technician, I'd point you to someplace like Solar Energy International, SEI, and getting on the ground training with one of the companies that are doing work in Montana right now. We represent upwards of 40 solar companies, and you can look at them on our website if you ever want to poke around and see who's in your neck of the woods. But they're all really great. All of them have Montana roots, which is really special. So the workforce world, I think, could see some more development in Montana. A lot when I ask, some of the people that are here now, a lot of them got their training out of state and then came back. So I'd love to see us think more critically about how to localize some of that and get to the critical mass that we have enough interest to continue it on for years and years.
Absolutely. Um, outside of the workforce, I want to talk a little bit about homeowner, and taxpayer, federal incentives. There's been a lot that's been going on, with some of the changes in federal incentives. There's things that have started, things that are still have yet to come. What changes can the Montana taxpayer uh, might what might they expect to see on the horizon?
Yeah. So it was a tough year for the federal tax incentives around homeowner owned solar and batteries. So that was around something called the Energy Investment Tax Credit or Clean Energy Tax Credit, also called 25D. Earlier this summer, that was under threat under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The MREA members organized. We took a bunch of trips over to DC. We met with our congressional delegation. And what we asked for was not simply to keep the credit alive, but to create more of a glide path down so that it wasn't as disruptive to small business owners who, have staff and overhead and margins that are fairly small. Unfortunately, we were not successful in that organizing effort. So the residential federal tax credit for installing solar or solar and batteries on your own home is no longer around. That said, as I've been hearing, even in these first couple of weeks of January, that's not stopping people from making the investment. It's not the end all be all. And it's actually simplifying for some people the fact that it's a straight up price to install your system and still be able to generate your own power, claim the credits for the power that you generate against your electricity bill if you are grid tied. And in generating your own power, you still have that return on your investment over the course of anywhere between like 7 to 13 years. So it's still possible. The financial, like it does end up penciling, maybe not as quickly as it would have with the little carrot of a tax incentive at the federal level. But at the same time, it doesn't complicate the waters quite so much. On the commercial side, we still are seeing some of the federal incentives that will continue through the next couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see how some of that plays out with the rules and regulations that are still getting sorted for like some country of origin components requirements that we're seeing. But as far as our outlook, we're going to continue to be resilient and we're going to continue to adapt. Of course, we're going to follow all the laws that we have to. We find it kind of frustrating when it seems like the laws are there just to get in your way, because we'd rather just have a level playing field.
Right, right. Um, I want to look at the one thing that I wanted to look at was the Haymaker Wind Project and the Glendive Wind Project. Can you speak a little bit to those?
Yeah, so those are a couple of wind projects under development. I want to say that Haymaker, correct me if I'm wrong, but Haymaker is under the AES and the Nextera. Glendive Wind is owned by a company called Nextera Energy, and they're big global. I think they're based out of Florida. They own natural gas, some renewables. They're a big wholesale energy provider. But those are two big wind projects that are under development. I mean, it's multi-year, and as far as their official dates of when they will be flipped on, when they're flipping the switch, I don't have that off the top of my head, but those are active both in central Montana and eastern Montana right now.
And something else that's kind of on the horizon too, as far as energy, is this concept of plug-in solar, or otherwise known in Europe as balcony solar. It's a small portable system. It's a solar system that allows folks to plug directly into your standard household to offset your home's electricity use. It's not like those big panels I mean, but they're not permanently installed, which makes them much more accessible for the homeowner. Where does MREA stand on these?
Yeah, plug-in solar is a really cool concept that we have been learning about in real time, along with following the Utah legislation that passed last year. So, 2025, Representative Raymond Ward out of Utah sponsored a bill And there's also a group called Bright Saver, if you want to look at them. They're also championing this balcony solar concept. What we're finding is like what is allowable in Europe and the UK and Germany. It has some regulatory hurdles and technical hurdles in the US, but they are not insurmountable. It's a matter of getting UL listings. I mean, you might see those on your light bulbs or other pieces of electrical equipment to prove that the product is safe and usable and you can plug it into your outlet. So that's getting worked on right now as we speak. The other thing about plug-in solar is in Utah as well as other places, the system size is significantly smaller than what you'd see with a standard rooftop solar system, where you'd have to go through the interconnection application with a utility and go through all the paperwork and get an electrician to do your final sign off and all of that. So for us, we think it's a great opportunity for renters and those that might not be able to afford the upfront larger investment of a bigger system. And for people that just have a smaller overhead, like if you want something to run your fridge and your dryer and you just don't have that much electricity use in your life, then this would be one great way to offset your electricity with something that's clean and green. So what we'd love to see is we're keeping eyes on that Utah legislation and see how it rolls out with private investment, keeping up, and see if we can get some of those legal hurdles and technical hurdles covered from the National Electric Code and those UL standards, because I think that's what we're going to need in order to say that at least the products themselves can be sold in the United States outside of Utah. And maybe that's something that we could adopt in other states too.
Well, it's exciting to have something that accessible, and like you said, we get to watch Utah, and we'll see what that looks like in Montana. Earlier, you talked about enhanced geothermal systems. We talked about what that would look like. Um, let's. Uh, where is? Talk to us about that. Enhanced geothermal systems. How intense is it? What would that look like? How does MREA stand on it? Stand.
Yeah. So you might have heard of geothermal before. If you like hot springs, you might know that those nice warm waters are warmed by geothermal assets. Warming of the earth. The Yellowstone hotspot, that's technically a geothermal hotspot. But enhanced geothermal is just a different type of technology that can produce around the clock electricity by tapping into the Earth's natural heat at a different type of heat capture that uses some of the similar mechanisms to fracking. So you'd be injecting water into different fractures, circulating that water, and then bringing the heat from those fractures up to the surface in order to create zero emission energy. We think this is relevant because, when we're thinking about renewables, which is a part of our name, the Montana Renewable Energy Association, we think about what type of resources are truly renewable. So something that doesn't have a finite fuel source. And for us, the sun, that's a free source of fuel. The Earth's heat, that's a free source of fuel that could go on for a really, really, really long time. And so that's something that we're pretty excited about because it doesn't have the same environmental impacts. There's still questions because it's early in its testing and research and development as far as induced seismicity, what could be the potential impacts to aquifers or neighbors, water impacts with ranching. Those are all really important questions that still need to be answered. But for enhanced geothermal, we think that that's certainly going to qualify as a renewable resource. We recognize its growing relevance, and we're excited to see it demonstrate commercial success at scale. So that's what we're tracking on. The Fervo project is certainly one that I would point to if you want to be tracking what's going on in the world of geothermal. For Montana, our policymakers are trying to untangle what would I call it? The regulatory knot of who's responsible for what part of the process, because is it a surface right, is it a mineral right, are we talking about water rights? So you have this tangle of the DEQ, DNRC, potentially the EPA. So trying to figure out how to permit effectively so that a project could actually come underway is a priority that I know our lawmakers are trying to figure out to encourage that type of development, just to make it clear for permitting.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting, like you said, and I had the opportunity to go to Iceland years ago, and I know that they're using a lot of geothermal there. In fact, I heard that Reykjavik, or while I was there, they said that there are some towns where they have to actually cool the water in order to use the water because it's coming in so warm. Like it's just so. Certainly, somewhere like Montana, if we could do it, what an awesome thing. So, thank you for bringing that to the public's attention. The last topic I want to cover with you is a while ago we did talk to Montana Environmental Information Council about AI data centers. What is Montana Renewable Energy Association's stance on data centers and large loads?
Yeah, huge topic. There's so much that still needs to be figured out for ratepayer impacts and the potential good and bad of having AI and data centers around. For us, we're agnostic and don't hold a formal position on data centers themselves, but we strongly believe that any new large load development in Montana should be powered by renewable energy at every opportunity. We also believe that these new data centers, if they're coming in, they shouldn't be adversely impacting other utility customers. And this is something that we're hearing from the data center developers also. They say a common rate making principle you hear is cost causer should be cost payer. So if you want to nerd out in that world, you might hear that a time or two. But the data centers are saying, no, we want to pay our way, we want to pay our fair share. We're not here to adversely impact other people. And so I think that's truly the intent. At least that's what we're hearing from some of the developers that want to come in. But some creative ideas for like bring your own generation. If we can be powering these things with renewables and battery backup, every opportunity we can to incent that and connect our workforce, especially a Montana workforce, to make those projects happen. That's where we stand on the data center discussion. But we'll see what actually comes to bear. There's a lot of talk and a lot of speculation, and as I heard because I was listening in on that data center podcast you did with MEIC, it could very well be that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we may not have any of these, or we may only have a fraction of what we expected actually come to bear in reality. We don't know.
Yeah, it's just there's so much that could go.
It is the
But
bubble,
uh
as
but
they say.
yeah. Well, and just like you said, we can't respond to energy needs minutes before, months before. You need to have plans. And there's so much about AI we don't know. And energy needs and how do you plan for that? And then what does it look? It's messy. And the
Yeah,
last thing that we want is for your everyday Montanan to have to struggle. Because of how folks want to steamroll,
right. And so like
struggle
the
financially or with clean air or water. So, not have that.
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, good. I think it's just interesting to follow that some states are looking at some contingency planning, saying that okay, we'll plan on supplying X data center with the megawatts of power that they need, but in the case that they decide to pull out of the deal, they're still on the hook for half, 80%. Fill in the blank. It's an interesting concept to think about, because then you're not leaving the everyday residential person holding the bag, yet you're still building the infrastructure that could be beneficial in the long run for at least some use for transmission and distribution. But there's lots to think about on that.
Absolutely. Well, McKenna, you have been fantastic today. How can folks follow you, learn more, donate, join? Tell us how can listeners support MREA?
You can always check out our website. We are www.montanarenewables.org. We're planning on doing some regional meetups more often this year. So we're planning on bringing those, whether that's going to be some brewery nights and more networking opportunities in different parts around the state. Our network is just, it's our asset. It's our well, I think it's one of the greatest things about the Montana Renewable Energy Association is the diversity of the people in our membership. If you want to be involved, we have a membership spot for you. Whether you're a nonprofit, a utility, an individual, would encourage you to join or invest in the organization. And yeah, those are the big things. We'll do some online webinars throughout the year. So keep tabs with us. Go follow us on socials. Check out the website. And you're always welcome to shoot me a note. I'm around and available and love to talk about this stuff. As you can tell, I kind of nerd out.
Well, and thank goodness you're here because I mean, this is exactly what we want to your passion for it, your knowledge, your expertise, and the way you like you said, you were in Helena. You're down there actually rubbing elbows and trying to get things done on behalf of clean energy in Montana. So I thank you for renewable energy in Montana. So I thank you for all the work that you are doing, folks. Montana Renewable Energy Association Executive Director Makenna Sellers. Thank you so much for joining us. Folks, that is another episode of Follow the Leader. I am your host, Lee. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.